There's a documentary about a very famous Japanese sushi chef titled Jiro Dreams of Sushi, which is why I decided to title my talk Jock Dreams of Data Sushi. So what do I mean by data sushi? I mean a visualization that's beautiful on the outside and has raw data on the inside. So why should we care about data sushi or raw data? And that's the focus of my talk today. I'm going to tell you 3 reasons why you should care, and then I'm going to talk about 3 excuses that people put up for why they don't do data sushi, and try and convince you that it's something that we should do more of in visualization. So the first reason for putting raw data in your visualization is that it can increase dwell time. Dwell time, for me, is evoked by this picture, is if we can create visualizations where a person can dive into them and get quality time working with them, increases their engagement. Actually, I think that overlaps a lot with what Alberto talked about this morning in terms of truthfulness, honesty, those sorts of things. You'll get a feel for that as I go further through the talk. And I have there's a particular pattern that people do a lot with raw data in this way, which is to make the visualization personal. And as I was working on this talk, I was wandering around and I ran across this recent Washington Post view, which is about the super zips. And so you have this map of all the super zips, which are high in both economic and education levels. And then there's this nice place where you can type in your zip code up at the top. And so naturally, as I was there, I typed in my zip code, and I got engaged. I drilled down to my area. And in fact, my wife, who was in the same room, I started telling her about what I was finding, and we were talking about the neighboring zip codes. And it was 10 or 15 minutes into it. I had engaged with this visualization. In terms of insight, to use one of Alberto's categories, I think we decided that we were a little skeptical, actually, of the rankings that were in here, given what we knew about our neighborhood. But nevertheless, it was an interesting example of that. And so I think that raw data can be used to create these kinds of visualizations that draw people in one way or another. Another reason to use raw data is that it can validate the author. So this is actually a hard point. So why do authors need validation? Well, I think that authors need validation because everyone instinctively knows that when you make data visual, you can actually mislead people. And so I'm going to use a very old example from Darrell Huff. He wrote a book many years ago called How to Lie with Statistics. If you've never read this book, it's really amusing. And this is one of the little charts in the book. On the left is the standard trend line with 0, which shows a modest increase over time. And then, of course, we all know that if you remove the 0, you can get a sense of doubling. Your visual system will see doubling regardless of anything else. And then, of course, if you stretch it out, that trend line will look alarming. I think that most of the population knows that visualization can be used to create false impressions about data. And so we need to guard against that. We need to deal with that. And I believe that raw data can be a way to do that. And I'm going to use the most classic example of that. Here are 3 data values. They're all averages, and they all look identical. Are they really identical? Here's another. 2 of these are identical, and 1 of them is different. Is that difference really meaningful? I claim that if you actually ask this question, if you have a little bit of skepticism, what you need to do is you need to look at the raw data underneath to find out the answers. And these are the classic cases where the top one is an average based on a wide distribution. The next one is an average based on a tight distribution. And then the one at the bottom is an average based upon a tight distribution plus an outlier. And of course, if you remove the outlier, that pushes it to a different spot. And if you don't have access to this raw data, if you don't actually know what the source of the data is that you're looking at, how much can you trust it? And if you're an author and you provide the raw data and the ability to go in and do these kind of comparisons, you're actually telling people, this is, I believe in what I've done. There's some integrity to what I'm doing. I provided the data here for you to look at it as well. And so that's what I mean by validating the author. The third thing is that I believe that if we could provide the data, the raw data associated with visualizations will encourage conversations. So this is a view that was published a long time ago on Tableau Public from the WisconsinWatch.org by Kate Golden, who works there as a data journalist. And in Wisconsin, evidently, they're very interested in milk production and cows. And so this visualization is about, there are fewer cows recently, but the amount of milk has gone up. And because the data was as part of this was picked up by Rick Perry, who's an economist professor. And he actually added in what I think is actually a very interesting addition to the conversation, which is the price of milk over time has dropped as well, probably because there are fewer cows. And actually, relating to the previous talk, I think people can relate a lot more to price than they can to the number of cows. And so that augments this as well. Now, the interesting thing is, as I look at the analytics on Tableau Public, I don't see a lot of this sort of conversation going on. And often, actually, I see a lot of visualizations that don't have a lot of richness to their data, which is why I'm making this plea. But in Tableau, anyway, we do have data visualizations built on top of raw data, direct connected to databases. And I see a lot of activity where people bring down a view, do some work on it, riff, add some additional things, and then communicate it to other people. So I think this is a huge potential in the public discourse space if we actually added raw data into it as well. So those are 3 reasons why we should have raw data. Now I'm going to talk about 3 excuses. The first excuse is people have cooked data. So what do I mean by cooked data? What I mean is data precisely at the level of the view. And in Tableau, we call that result set data. So I went to the Olympics because I've just been watching them a lot. This is the 2010 medal counts. I didn't bother to update my slides for this year, but it would have looked somewhat the same, although the top country would have been different. But you can see the underlying data set here, which I actually typed in off of, or actually I cut and pasted it off of Wikipedia, actually matches this view. There's just not a lot you can do with this. So, you know, if I can't drill into it, I can't dwell on it. There's not a lot that goes on here. It's just the data set itself. And so I call this an excuse because what I say to people is, come on, buck up, gather some more data. And so, you know, I can go get the additional tables for the Winter Olympics off of Wikipedia, which I did here, and already I can start to make something interesting. I can, you know, highlight the particular countries and look at the trends against the other countries and do stuff like that. And if you think about it, for this data set and for almost all data sets, there's always more data you can gather up. I could have had the medal information about the individuals rather than at the country level. I could look at the country population and do the kind of comparisons that we were talking about before about the relationship there, which we saw in Alberto's talk, or GDP. I could look at information about the host country. I could look at weather. There's on and on. There's rich data that can be gathered up. And so you do not need to do visualization based upon cooked data. You should do more interesting stuff than that. The second excuse that is very common is that once you've done all that work, it's too valuable to share, right? I want to hoard this data set that I built up. I completely relate to this, right? I myself have gathered up data, and it's a lot of work to do it, and you want to use it and, you know, take advantage of it yourself. And absolutely, I understand the importance of that. But what I would argue is that you should actually plan your storytelling. In particular, you might do one story off of it and share part of the data. Add in another story, share more of the data. But please, please, please put it on your calendar that at some point you share all of the data. And the reason to do that is because then you can at least encourage conversations with others. You can validate yourself. And furthermore, some people might take your data and start riffing on it, and then you'll get some ideas for additional stories that you can tell. Or they might bring additional data to the party, and then the two of you can proceed forward. Now, I have one sort of, I'm a techie. I have one sort of technical point along these lines that's very interesting, which is that you can also share aggregated data. So if you gathered really detailed data, you can still share raw data in an aggregated way. And so I wanted to show you that with a classic temporal roll-up. So on the left here is time values all the way down to the minute. Actually, I guess it's down to the second. And then you can roll that data up to the day level. In other words, you haven't shared all of your data, but you can share some form of the data and then roll it up to the month level. So this is a way to create data sets that you could share with people, but that still hold on to some of your data as well. The third excuse I hear is that it's hard to share raw data. And that's certainly true in client-server architectures, which most of us are doing our storytelling in. You have a server, you have a client, and data, raw data is big data, and it can be hard to share. Now, there are a couple of approaches that have been used traditionally for this. One approach is a server-side architecture, which is what Tableau Public used in 2009 when it launched, which is to keep the raw data on the server side and then send down image tiles to the client. And the problem with that architecture is that there needs to be a round trip every time you're interacting with the view, which can be a couple seconds or even longer. And those taps, those slow taps, are extremely irritating. So that's the problem with a server-side architecture. Now, the other obvious approach is the client-side architecture, which lots of people have used as well. There are two difficulties with that. One difficulty is that it can take a really long time to move the raw data, the big data, down to the client. And then once it's there, you're now on a much smaller device, and the computations over that data can be really, really slow. And so this is, I think, since a lot of people have done client-side architectures, this is one of the reasons they don't tend to do big data. And what we're seeing now is a trend to the hybrid of these two approaches, a hybrid architecture. And so Tableau Public in particular is moving this way, where you keep the bulk of the data on the server side, where the machine is big and powerful, but you also send data down to the client where you can get fast interaction. And I thought that the way I would illustrate this is to pick up one of the really little features that will come out in 8.2, where we move some more information down onto the client side. And so I was going to end my talk with a little demo of this. We call this a responsive marks. So as you see, as I move over here, I don't have to go back to the server to get the hovering. Oops. This server is actually running on my local machine, but even still, I wouldn't have to go back and talk to it. So this is what I mean. It's like if you bring down the right sort of information, you can have responsiveness on the client, but still be connected to big data on the server. And I don't have time here to go into the depths of this, but it's a very rich space for technologists to work in. And I think a lot of people are starting to work on that. So that's it. I hope I've convinced you that there are good reasons to include raw data in your visualization, and that there are good arguments for the excuses that people have for not doing that. So I'm now open for questions.
Well, it's coming up. Let's take
Oh.
one or two questions.
OK. If you could just point to people if anyone asks a question.
There is a mic.
Oh, yeah, we have that mic, too. That's cool, actually. I'm trying to get Emma set up here. Oh.
Spoilers.
You want to take the mic? No questions, that's fine. This is, OK, go ahead.
Does this work? Yeah.
So there's a book that came out recently called Raw Data as an Oxymoron, which yeah, you should grab it. So the point is that data has always been cooked to some extent before it even gets into a tool like Tableau. Do you have any thoughts on sort of the steps leading up to the data set that eventually gets visualized, and what is your sort of position on whether or not we should be providing additional context in terms of how it was gathered, how it was sampled, how it was transformed, what the perhaps political perspective was on why the data was gathered, and so on?
Well, I think at the conversation, so the question was, and actually I'm not on mic either.
Jock.
So the question for the streaming people was that there's a book. What was the title of it? Raw data is an oxymoron, which is the point is, I think that all data is not raw. It's all cooked to a certain level. And I think that's correct. But of course, if it's cooked all the way up to the visualization, that's what I was worrying about. I think the art of it is that you're always moving through this. Like we were talking last night about large sensor networks, where you have to actually do computations on the sensor network because there's so much data there that you can't actually store it all. And so you do have to be mindful about that. I think it's actually deeply mindful about it. And then the other half of it is that you should bring to bear additional data to validate the data you have. And so you get into that rich space about that. But it is about not just going up to the cooked place and only talking about that. You have to talk about the provenance of how you got there. Yeah. So thanks. So next.
Thank you, Jock.